on here.
Without clear-cut enemies, he believed, his people would lose any sense of what Chinese communism meant. A sharply defined enemy is a far stronger argument for your side than all the words you could possibly put together. Never let the presence of enemies upset or distress you. You are far better off with a declared opponent or two than not knowing where your real enemies lie. The man of power welcomes conflict, using enemies to enhance his reputation as a sure-footed fighter who can be relied upon in times of uncertainty. Reversal. Although it is generally best not to mix work with friendship, there are times when a friend can be used to greater effect than an enemy. A man of power, for example, often has...
We're listening to 48 Laws of Power if you're just getting
but
there.
for the sake of appearances, it is generally preferable to have other people do it for him. Friends often do this the best, since their affection for him makes them willing to take chances. Also, if your plans go awry for some reason, you can use a friend as a convenient scapegoat.
That's horrible.
This fall of the favorite
That is so horrible.
was a trick often used by kings and sovereigns. They would let their closest friend at court take the fall for a mistake, since the public would not believe that they would deliberately sacrifice a friend for such a purpose.
That's so messed up.
Of course, after you play that card, you have lost your friend forever.
Like, duh.
It is best then to reserve the scapegoat role for someone who is close to you, but not too.
Damn, that's some...
Finally, the
that's
problem
cold.
of working with friends is that it confuses the boundaries and distances that working requires. But if both partners in the arrangement understand the dangers involved, a friend can often be employed to great effect. You must never let your guard down in such a venture, however. Always be on the lookout for any signs of emotional disturbance, such as envy and ingratitude.
Indubitably.
Nothing is stable in the realm of power, and even the closest of friends can be transformed into the worst of enemies.
This is true as well.
Here are further reflections on this law. From Dion de Poitiers. To have a good enemy, choose a friend. He knows where to strike. From Louis XIV. Every time I bestow a vacant office, I make 100 discontented persons and 1 ingrate. From Baldassare Castiglione. Thus, for my own part, I have more than once been deceived by the person I loved most, and of whose love, above everyone else's, I have been most confident. So that I believe that it may be right to love and serve one person above all others.
Hi, Riley. How you
according to
doing?
merit and worth, but never to trust so much in this tempting trap of friendship as to have cause to repent of it later on.
We're listening to the 48 Laws of Power. Hi.
From Niccolo Machiavelli. There are many who think, therefore, that a wise prince ought, when he has the chance, to foment astutely some enmity, so that by suppressing it, he will augment his greatness. Princes, and especially new ones, have found more faith and more usefulness in those men whom, at the beginning of their power, they regarded with suspicion, than in those they at first confided in. Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, governed his state more by those whom he suspected than by others. From an African folktale, the snake, the farmer, and the heron. A snake, chased by hunters, asked a farmer to save his life. To hide it from its pursuers, the farmer squatted and let the snake crawl into his belly. When the danger
I'm doing
passed,
work
the farmer
too.
asked the snake
We're
to come
listening
up.
to the 48
The
Laws of
snake
Power.
refused.
Oh, it's not a
He wanted to
TV.
save
We're
himself.
listening to it. I'm working.
On his way home, the man
You guys
saw
want to
a
watch me
heron
work?
and went up to him and whispered what had happened.
You can.
The heron told him to squat and strain to eject the snake.
I don't mind.
When the snake snuck its head out, the heron caught it, pulled it out, and killed it.
Let me put it somewhere.
The farmer was worried that the snake's poison might still be inside it.
Dang it.
And
Hold
the heron
on.
told him that the cure for snake poison was to cook and eat 6 white fowl. "You're a white fowl," said the farmer. "You'll do for a start." He grabbed the heron, put it in a bag, and carried
Where's my
it home,
damn tripod
where he hung it
thing?
up while he told his wife what had happened.
No
"I'm
worries.
surprised at you," said the wife. "The bird does you a kindness, rids you of the evil in your belly, saves your life, in fact. Yet you catch it and talk of killing
There you
it."
go. Oh,
She
can't see
immediately
that.
released the heron,
Gotta move
and it
that out
flew
the way.
away.
Haha.
But on its way, it gouged out her eyes.
It's funny because I actually have the book, but I'm
When
listening
you
to
see
it. I
water
don't know
flowing
why,
uphill,
but
it
yeah.
means that someone is repaying a kindness.
That's all right.
From the Mahabharata, a Brahmin, a great expert in Veda, who has become a great archer as well, offers his services to his good friend, who is now the king. The Brahmin cries out when he sees the king, "Recognize me, your friend." The king answers him with contempt and then explains, "Yes, we were friends before, but our friendship was based on what power we had. I was friends with you, good Brahmin, because it served my purpose. No pauper is friend of the rich, no fool to the wise, no coward to the brave. An old friend, who needs him? It is two men of equal wealth and equal birth who contract friendship in marriage, not a rich man and a pauper. An old friend, who needs him?" From a Sufi proverb, pick up a bee from kindness and learn the limitations of kindness. From Tacitus, men are more ready to repay an injury than a benefit, because gratitude is a burden and revenge a pleasure. From Plutarch, profiting by our enemies. King Hiero chanced upon a time, speaking with one of his enemies, to be told in a reproachful manner that he had stinking breath. Whereupon the good king, being somewhat dismayed in himself, saluted his wife. "How does it happen that you never told me of this problem?" The woman, being a simple, chaste, and harmless dame, said, "Sir, I had thought all men's breath had smelled so." Thus it is plain that faults that are evident to the senses, gross and corporal, or otherwise notorious to the world, we know by our enemies, sooner than by our
Pardon me.
friends and familiars. Conceal your intentions.
Conceal your intentions.
Keep people off balance and in the dark by never revealing the purpose behind your actions.
Period.
If they have no clue what you're up to, they cannot prepare a defense.
Period.
Guide them far enough down the wrong path.
Period.
Envelop them in enough smoke.
Period.
By the time they realize your intentions, it will be too late.
Period.
Part 1. Use deep
Bye, darling.
of desire and red herrings to throw people off the scent. If at any point in the deception you practice, people have the slightest suspicion as to your intentions, all is lost.
All is lost.
Do not give them the chance to sense what you're up to.
Period.
Throw them off the scent by dragging red herrings across the path.
Period.
Use false sincerity. Send ambiguous signals. Set up misleading objects of desire. Unable to distinguish the genuine from the false, they cannot pick out your real goal.
Facts.
Transgression of the law. Over several weeks, Ninon de L'Enclos, the most infamous courtesan of 17th century France, listened patiently as the Marquis de Sévigné explained his struggles in pursuing a beautiful but difficult young countess. Ninon was 62 at the time, and more than experienced in matters of love. The Marquis was a lad of 22, handsome, dashing, but hopelessly inexperienced in romance. At first, Ninon was amused to hear the Marquis talk about his mistakes, but finally she had had enough. Unable to bear ineptitude in any realm, least of all in seducing a woman, she decided to take the young man under her wing. First, he had to understand that this was war, and that the beautiful countess was a citadel, to which he had to lay siege as carefully as any general. Every step had to be planned and executed with the utmost attention to detail and nuance. Instructing the Marquis to start over, Ninon told him to approach the countess with a bit of distance, an air of nonchalance. The next time the two were alone together, she said, he would confide in the countess as would a friend, but not a potential lover. This was to throw her off the scent. The countess was no longer to take his interest in her for granted. Perhaps he was only interested in friendship. Ninon planned ahead. Once the countess was confused, it would be time to make her jealous. At the next encounter, at a major fete in Paris, the Marquis would show up with a beautiful young woman at his side. This beautiful young woman had equally beautiful friends. so that wherever the Countess would now see the Marquis, he would be surrounded by the most stunning young women in Paris. Not only would the Countess be seething with jealousy, she would come to see the Marquis as someone who was desired by others. It was hard for Ninon to make the Marquis understand, but she patiently explained that a woman who is interested in a man wants to see that other women are interested in him too. Not only does that give him instant value, it makes it all the more satisfying to snatch him from their clutches. Once the Countess was jealous but intrigued, it would be time to beguile her. On Ninon's instructions, the Marquis would fail to show up at affairs where the Countess expected to see him. Then suddenly, he would appear at salons he had never frequented before. But the Countess attended often. She would be unable to predict his moves. All of this would push her into a state of emotional confusion that is a prerequisite for successful seduction.
No.
These moves were executed and took several weeks. Ninon monitored the Marquis's progress. Through her network of spies, she heard how the Countess would laugh a little harder at his witticisms, listen more closely to his stories. She heard that the Countess was suddenly asking questions about him. Her friends told her that at social affairs, the Countess would often look up at the Marquis, following his steps. Ninon felt certain that the young woman was falling under his spell. It was a matter of weeks now, maybe a month or two, but if all went smoothly, the citadel would fall. A few days later, the Marquis was at the Countess's house. They were alone. Suddenly, he was a different man. His own impulse, rather than following Ninon's instructions, he took the Countess's hands and told her he was in love with her. The young woman seemed confused, a reaction he did not expect. She became polite, then excused herself. For the rest of the evening, she avoided his eyes, was not there to say goodnight to him. The next few times he visited, he was told she was not at home. When she finally admitted him again, the two felt awkward and uncomfortable with each other.
Not awkward and
The spell
uncomfortable.
was broken. Interpretation. Ninon de L'Enclos knew everything about the art of love. The greatest writers, thinkers, and politicians of the time had been her lovers. Men like La Rochefoucauld, Molière, and Richelieu. Seduction was a game to her, to be practiced with skill. As she got older and her reputation grew, the most important families in France would send their sons to her to be instructed in matters of love. Ninon knew that men and women are very different. But when it comes to seduction, they feel the same. Deep down inside, they often sense when they are being seduced.
Deep.
But they give in because they enjoy the feeling of being led along.
Deep.
It is a pleasure to let go and allow the other person to detour you into a strange country.
Deep.
Everything in seduction, however, depends on suggestion. You cannot announce your intentions or reveal them directly in words. Instead, you must throw your targets off the scent. To surrender to your guidance, they must be appropriately confused. You have to scramble your signals. Appear interested in another man or woman, the decoy. Then hint at being interested in the target. Then feign indifference. On and on. Such patterns not only confuse, they excite.
Riveting.
Imagine this story from the Countess's perspective. After a few of the Marquis's moves, she sensed the Marquis was playing some sort of game, but the game delighted her. She didn't know where he was leading her, but so much the better. His moves intrigued her, each one of them keeping her waiting for the next one. She even enjoyed her jealousy and confusion, for sometimes any emotion is better than the boredom of security. Perhaps the Marquis had ulterior motives. Most men do. But she was willing to wait and see. And probably if she had been made to wait long enough, what he was up to would not have mattered. The moment the Marquis uttered that fatal word love, however, all was changed. This was no longer a game with moves. It was an artless show of passion. His intention was revealed. He was seducing her. This put everything he had done in a new light. All that before had been charming now seemed ugly and conniving. The Countess felt embarrassed and used. A door closed that would never open again.
Ugly and conniving.
Observance of the law. In 1850, the young Otto von Bismarck, then a 35-year-old deputy in the Prussian parliament, was at a turning point in his career. The issues of the day were the unification of the many states, including Prussia, into which Germany was then divided, and a war against Austria, the powerful neighbor to the south that hoped to keep the Germans weak and at odds, even threatening to intervene if they tried to unite. Prince William, next in line to be Prussia's king, was in favor of going to war, and the parliament rallied to the cause, prepared to back any mobilization of troops. The only ones opposed to war were the present king, Frederick William IV, and his ministers, who preferred to appease the powerful Austrians. Throughout his career, Bismarck had been a loyal, even passionate supporter of Prussian might and power. He dreamed of German unification, of going to war against Austria and humiliating the country that for so long had kept Germany divided. A former soldier, he saw warfare as a glorious business. This, after all, was the man who years later would say, "The great questions of the time will be decided not by speeches and resolutions, but by iron and blood." Passionate patriot and lover of military glory, Bismarck nevertheless gave a speech in Parliament at the height of the war fever that astonished all who heard it. "Woe unto the statesman," he said, "who makes war without a reason that will still be valid when the war is over. After the war, you will all look differently at these questions. Will you then have the courage to turn to the peasant contemplating the end crippled, to the father who has lost his children?" Not only did Bismarck go on to talk of the madness of this war, but strangest of all, he praised Austria and defended her actions. This went against everything he had stood for. The consequences were immediate. Bismarck was against the war. What could this possibly mean? Other deputies were confused, and several of them changed their votes. Eventually, the king and his ministers won out, and war was averted. A few weeks after Bismarck's infamous speech, the king, grateful that he had spoken for peace, made him a cabinet minister. A few years later, he became the Prussian premier. In this role, he eventually led his country and a peace-loving king into a war against Austria, crushing the former empire and establishing a mighty German state, with Prussia at its head. Interpretation. At the time of his speech in 1850, Bismarck made several calculations. First, he sensed that the Prussian military, which had not kept pace with other European armies, was unready for war. That Austria, in fact, might very well win, a disastrous result for the future. Second, if the war were lost and Bismarck had supported it, his career would be gravely jeopardized. The king and his conservative ministers wanted peace. Bismarck wanted power. The answer was to throw people off the scent by supporting a cause he detested, saying things he would laugh at if said by another. A whole country was fooled. It was because of Bismarck's speech that the king made him a minister, a position from which he quickly rose to be prime minister, attaining the power to strengthen the Prussian military and accomplish what he had wanted all along, the humiliation of Austria and the unification of Germany under Prussia's leadership. Bismarck was certainly one of the cleverest statesmen who ever lived, a master of strategy and deception. No one suspected what he was up to in this case. Had he announced his real intentions, arguing that it was better to wait now and fight later, he would not have won the argument.
True.
Since most Prussians wanted war at that moment and mistakenly believed that their army was superior to the Austrians. Had he played up to the king, asking to be made a minister in exchange for supporting peace, he wouldn't have succeeded either. The king would have distrusted his ambition and doubted his sincerity. By being completely insincere and sending misleading signals, however, he deceived everyone, concealed his purpose, and attained everything he wanted. Such is the power of hiding your intentions. Keys to power. Most people are open books. They say what they feel, blurt out their opinions at every opportunity, and constantly reveal their plans and intentions. They do this for several reasons. First, it is easy and natural to always want to talk about one's feelings and plans for the future. It takes effort to control your tongue and monitor what you reveal. Second, many believe that by being honest and open, they are winning people's hearts and showing their good nature. They are greatly deluded. Honesty is actually a blunt instrument, which bloodies more than it cuts. Your honesty is likely to offend people. It is much more prudent to tailor your words, telling people what they want to hear rather than the coarse and ugly truth of what you feel or think.
That's true.
More important, by being unabashedly open, you make yourself so predictable and familiar that it's almost impossible to respect or fear you. And power will not accrue to a person who cannot inspire such emotions. If you yearn for power, quickly lay honesty aside and train yourself in the art of concealing your intentions. Master the art and you will always have the upper hand. Basic to an ability to conceal one's intentions is a simple truth about human nature. Our first instinct is to always trust appearances. We cannot go around doubting the reality of what we see and hear. Constantly imagining that appearances conceal something else would exhaust and terrify us. This fact makes it relatively easy to conceal one's intentions. Simply dangle an object you seem to desire, a goal you seem to aim for, in front of people's eyes, and they will take the appearance for reality. Once their eyes focus on the decoy, they will fail to notice what you're really up to. In seduction, setting up conflicting signals, such as desire and indifference, and you not only throw them off the scent, you inflame their desire to possess you. A tactic that is often effective in setting up a red herring is to appear to support an idea or cause that is actually contrary to your own sentiments. Bismarck used this to great effect in his speech in 1850. Most people will believe you have experienced a change of heart, since it is so unusual to play so lightly with something as emotional as one's opinions and values. The same applies for any decoyed object of desire. Seem to want something in which you are actually not at all interested, and your enemies will be thrown off the scent, making all kinds of errors in their calculations. During the War of the Spanish Succession in 1711, the Duke of Marlborough, head of the English army, wanted to destroy a key French fort because it protected a vital thoroughfare into France. Yet he knew that if he destroyed it, the French would realize what he wanted, to advance down that road. Instead, then, he merely captured the fort and garrisoned it with some of his troops, making it appear as if he wanted it for some purpose of his own. The French attacked the fort, and the Duke let them recapture it. Once they had it back, though, they destroyed it, figuring that the Duke had wanted it for some important reason. Now that the fort was gone, the road was unprotected, and Marlborough could easily march into France. Use this tactic in the following manner. Hide your intentions not by closing up, with the risk of appearing secretive and making people suspicious, but by talking endlessly about your desires and goals, just not your real ones. You will kill 3 birds with 1 stone. You appear friendly, open, and trusting. You conceal your intentions, and you send your rivals on time-consuming wild goose chases. Another powerful tool in throwing people off the scent is false sincerity. People easily mistake sincerity for honesty. Remember, their first instinct is to trust appearances. And since they value honesty and want to believe in the honesty of those around them, they will rarely doubt you or see through your act.
Not these days.
Seeming to believe what you say gives your words great weight. This is how Iago deceived and destroyed Othello. Given the depth of his emotions, the apparent sincerity of his concerns about Desdemona's supposed infidelity, how could Othello distrust him? This is also how the great con artist Yellow Kid Wilde pulled the wool over suckers' eyes. Seeming to believe so deeply in the decoyed object he was dangling in front of him, a phony stock, a touted racehorse, he made its reality hard to doubt. It is important, of course, not to go too far in this area. Sincerity is a tricky tool. Appear over-passionate and you raise suspicions. Be measured and believable, or your ruse will seem the put-on that it is. To make your false sincerity an effective weapon in concealing your intentions, espouse a belief in honesty and forthrightness as important social values. Do this as publicly as possible. Emphasize your position on this subject by occasionally divulging some heartfelt thought, though only one that is actually meaningless or irrelevant, of course. Napoleon's minister Talleyrand was a master at taking people into his confidence by revealing some apparent secret. This feigned confidence, a decoy, would then elicit a real confidence on the other person's part. Remember, the best deceivers do everything they can to cloak their roguish qualities. They cultivate an air of honesty in one area to disguise their dishonesty in others. Honesty is merely another decoy in their arsenal of weapons. Part 2. Use smokescreens to disguise your actions. Deception is always the best strategy, but the best deceptions require a screen of smoke to distract people's attention from your real purpose. The bland exterior, like the unreadable poker face, is often the perfect smokescreen, hiding your intentions behind the comfortable and familiar. If you lead the sucker down a familiar path, he won't catch on when you lead him into a trap. Observance of the law, number 1. In 1910, a Mr. Sam Giesel of Chicago sold his warehouse business for close to $1 million. He settled down to semi-retirement and the managing of his many properties. But deep inside, he itched for the old days of deal-making. One day, a young man named Joseph Weil visited his office, wanted to buy an apartment he had up for sale. Giesel explained the terms. The price was $8,000, but he only required $1,000. Weil said he would sleep on it, but he came back the following day and offered to pay the full $8,000 in cash if Giesel could wait a couple of days until a deal Weil was working on came through. Even in semi-retirement, a clever businessman like Giesel was curious as to how Weil would be able to come up with so much cash, roughly $150,000 today, so quickly.
I'm about to get ready to go
He
soon,
quickly
guys.
changed the subject. But Giesel was persistent. Finally, after assurances of
My
confidentiality,
phone is
Weil
dying.
told Giesel the following story.
Oh no, my
Weil's
phone
uncle was
is
the
dying.
secretary to a coterie of multimillionaire financiers. These wealthy gentlemen had purchased a hunting lodge in Michigan 10 years ago at a cheap price. They hadn't used the lodge for a few years, so they had decided to sell it and had asked Weil's uncle to get whatever he could for it. For reasons, good reasons of his own, the uncle had been nursing a grudge against the millionaires for years. This was his chance to get back at them. He would sell the property for $35,000 to a setup man, whom it was Weil's job to find. The financiers were too wealthy to worry about this low price. The setup man would then turn around and sell the property again for its real price, around $155,000. The uncle, Weil, and the third man would split the profits from this second sale. It was all legal and for a good cause, the uncle's just retribution. Giesel had heard enough. He wanted to be the setup buyer. Weil was reluctant to involve him, but Giesel wouldn't back down. The idea of a large profit plus a little adventure had him champing at the bit. Weil explained that Giesel would have to put up the $35,000 in cash to bring the deal off. Giesel, a millionaire, said he could get the money with a snap of his fingers. Weil finally relented and agreed to arrange a meeting between the uncle, Giesel, and the financiers in the town of Galesburg, Illinois. On the train ride to Galesburg, Giesel met the uncle, an impressive man with whom he avidly discussed business. Weil also brought along a companion, a somewhat paunchy man named George Gross. Weil explained to Giesel that he himself was a boxing trainer, that Gross was one of the promising prize fighters he trained, and that he had asked Gross to come along to make sure the fight was stayed in shape.
Anybody who meets me knows that
For a
I'm
promising fighter,
authentically
Gross was
finding my
unimpressive
enlightenment.
looking. He had gray hair and a beer belly. But Giesel was so excited about the deal that he didn't really think about the man's flabby appearance. Once in Galesburg, Weil and his uncle went to fetch the financiers, while Giesel waited in a hotel room with Gross. who promptly put on his boxing trunks. As Giesel half-watched, Gross began to shadowbox. Distracted as he was, Giesel ignored how badly the boxer wheezed after a few minutes of exercise, although his style seemed real enough. An hour later, Weil and his uncle reappeared with the financiers, an impressive, intimidating group of men, all wearing fancy suits. The meeting went well, and the financiers agreed to sell the lodge to Giesel, who had already had the $35,000
Okay,
wired to the
babies.
local bank.
I gotta let my phone charge. I'll
This
see you
minor
later.
business now settled, the
Bye.
financiers sat back in their chairs and began to banter about